Hey, how you doing? So today's topic is going to be respiratory system. So let's get started. Moving on to the next topic, that is lung volumes and capacities. How do you measure lung volume? It is done by using an instrument known as spirometer, and the technique is spirometry. So in this technique, what you do is there's a machine, there's spirometer where you blow into, and the machine records the amount of air that's blown per second, and this is how you get the data and how you calculate the different lung volumes. Now moving on to the different or the various lung volumes that are calculated. The first lung volume that we calculate is known as the tidal volume. So what is tidal volume? Tidal volume is this. It is the normal amount of air that you breathe in and breathe out during quiet respiration, and its value is approximately 500 ml. Okay. The next volume that we measure is the inspiratory reserve volume. The inspiratory reserve volume is the amount of air that you breathe in over and above the normal inspiration. That is inspiratory reserve volume, and its value is approximately 3 liters. Okay. The third volume that we measure is the expiratory reserve volume. So expiratory reserve volume, just like inspiratory reserve volume, is the amount of air that you expire after normal expiration. Okay, that is the expiratory reserve volume, and its normal value is approximately 1.1 liters. Cool. And the fourth and the last volume that we measure is the residual volume. The residual volume is the volume of air that is present in the lungs irrespective of how fast or how hard you expire. Okay, so this is the volume that is present constantly in the lungs. So what causes the air to stay in the lungs and not go out? It's the trans airway pressure that I described in the earlier part. The trans airway pressure causes the residual volume, and its normal value is approximately 1.2 liters. Okay, so that covers the various volumes that we measure. And moving on to the capacities. The capacities is nothing but addition of various volumes to obtain a capacity, so that helps us assess the lung function better. Okay, so first capacity that we measure is the inspiratory capacity. As the name suggests, it is the maximum amount of air that you can inspire, that maximum amount forced inspiration. That includes the normal tidal inspiration plus the inspiratory reserve volume, and its normal value is approximately 3.5 liters. Okay, and then we move on to the capacity, expiratory capacity. Expiratory capacity is the volume of air that you can expire. This includes the tidal expiration and expiratory reserve volume, and its normal value is approximately 1.6 liters. Okay, so that is the expiratory capacity. Now moving on to the third, that is the vital capacity. This is the most important capacity of all. This is basically the amount of air that you can expire after maximal inspiration. Okay, so after maximal inspiration, your lung volume will be approximately at this point, and then you expire maximally, so the lung volume decreases down right till here. So this volume that includes the inspiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and expiratory reserve volume is your vital capacity, and its normal value is approximately 4.6 liters. Okay, now coming to functional residual capacity. Okay, FRC. FRC means the amount of air present in the lungs after normal expiration. Okay, after normal expiration, the amount of air that will always be present is FRC. That includes the expiratory reserve volume and residual volume, that is FRC. Okay, and its normal value is approximately 2.3 liters. Okay, now the total lung capacity, or the maximum amount of air that the lungs can hold, it is the sum of sum of what you can say, like inspiratory capacity plus FRC, that's total lung capacity, or you can just use various lung volumes and capacities to obtain TLC, and its normal value is approximately 5.8 liters. Okay, so that is the total lung capacity. So this covers the various volumes and various capacities. Now one important thing. So one important thing that I have to mention over here is this technique that I mentioned earlier, spirometry. Spirometry cannot measure residual volume and FRC. Why is that? Residual volume, as I said, is the amount of air that is present always in your lungs. In spirometry, if you recollect, what we do is we blow into the machine. So something that is always present in your lungs and cannot come out, it can obviously not be measured in the spirometer. So what we use is a different technique. The technique is known as helium dilution technique, and that technique allows us to calculate residual volume. Now you may ask, so why don't we get FRC? So again, FRC was what? FRC was expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. If you do not have residual volume, you cannot calculate FRC. So that means the FRC can also not be calculated from the spirometry technique. Okay, so now that covers all the information regarding volumes and capacities. So just so that you have a better idea about what these capacities are and how they look, I'll demonstrate to you each and every lung volume and how it actually looks like. Okay, so starting off initially with the tidal volume. Tidal volume is the normal inspiration during quiet breathing. Normal inspiration expiration during quiet breathing. So how it looks like. Okay, so this, my hand denotes the amount of the inspiration and expiration. Since this was tidal volume, I cannot, there is no sound during this inspiration or expiration. This is during quiet breathing. So the hand movements represent inspiration and expiration respectively. Okay, now moving on to inspiratory reserve volume. Inspiratory reserve volume. Okay, so this was the tidal volume that I inspired, and this was the forced volume that I inspired. That is the inspiratory reserve volume. That this plus this is also the inspiratory capacity. Okay. Now moving on to expiratory reserve volume and expiratory capacity both together. So this initial part, that the decrease, this is the expiratory, this is normal expiration, that is the tidal volume, and this is the expiratory reserve volume that I expired. So this total is the expiratory capacity. Okay, so this covers majorly the so vital capacity. So how do you represent vital capacity, demonstrate vital capacity? Demonstrate vital capacity, there has to be normal inspiration, maximal inspiration, normal expiration, maximal expiration. That is your vital capacity. Okay, so this covers all the lung volumes and the lung capacities, and now we move on to the other part, that is the other graph. This is graph of forced expiratory volume or timed vital capacity. This graph you won't find coming in theories or just expecting you to write an answer on this. This graph is majorly asked in your table viva during the examination. So there are various charts present for table vivas. So over there, one of the charts is of timed vital capacity of forced expiratory volume, and I'm going to explain it to you oriented on that way, the major questions that are asked on the viva, and I'll explain you how to answer those questions. So now understanding and interpreting what this graph means. So this graph, as you can see, on the x-axis there is the time and the y-axis the volume. So FEV1, that is forced expiratory volume during first second, that is FEV1. That is the amount of air that is expired in first second. Okay, so this is the inspiration and this is the expiration curve. Okay, this is the inspiration, this is the expiration curve. So in expiration, the amount of air that is expired in the first second. See, so this is the first second. This is how much of the air is expired. So this is the actual amount of air that is expired in the first second. Okay, that is FEV1, and this approximately in a healthy individual, FEV1 ranges from 72 to 85%. But if you have to just say one value for it, it's approximately 80%. Okay, FE1 is the amount, so FE1 is approximately 80%. What does this mean? This means that after the, so what this means is the vital capacity is this much. The vital capacity is the amount of air that you maximum inspiration. So after maximum inspiration, the amount of air that you blow out during the first second, that is the FE1. That, and how much percentage of the total air that you expire, that is FeV1, and that is in normal individuals is up 80% approximately. Okay, so what is the use of this? From this graph you can differentiate between a person having restrictive, obstructive lung disease. So what do restrictive and obstructive lung diseases mean? To explain to you in very simple terms, restrictive lung diseases are diseases in which the movement of lungs are restricted. That is why the term restrictive lung diseases. Obstructive lung diseases are the diseases in which there is some kind of obstruction in the airway or in the path, that is the trachea, the bronchi or the bronchioles. There is an obstruction over there that causes the hindrance in the movement of air. That is something known as obstructive lung diseases. Okay, so these are the two types of diseases that are mainly concerned with the lungs, obstructive and restrictive. We classify various diseases under these two main classes. So what happens in obstructive lung diseases? In obstructive lung diseases, just imagine there is a obstruction in a pathway. So if there is an obstruction in a pathway, the movement will be hindered. So the amount, so to apply over here, the amount of air that reaches the lungs, the maximum amount of air that reaches in the lungs will decrease. So the graph would somewhat be like this. The amount of air that maximally reaches the lungs would decrease. So this is something where the amount of air reaching is decreased. Now what happens? That is during inspiration. Now during expiration, what happens? Again there is a hindrance, again there is an obstruction to the pathway. Okay, so once there is a so obviously there will be obstruction during inspiration and expiration. During expiration, if there is a obstruction, the time taken for the air to move out would increase. So what would happen? So this would the graph would somewhat look like this. As you can see, the amount of time taken for the entire volume of air to go out has increased from somewhat approximately 4.7 seconds to just more than 7 seconds. Okay, and if you notice carefully, the amount of air expired in the first second has also decreased. That is this FeV1 has also decreased. That means the percentage of air expired from the air present has decreased, and this decreases. This is significant only if the decrease is more than 72%. That means if the percentage of air that is expired is less than 72%, if it's 60, it's 40, then we classify it as restrictive lung disease. Okay, sorry, obstructive lung disease. This is what we call obstructive lung disease. Okay, now coming to restrictive lung disease. As I said, in restrictive lung disease, the lungs have an opposition. The lungs are opposed, that are restricted by something, so that the expansion of lungs does not take place. If expansion of lungs does not take place, the volume of air that is present, that is inspired, will decrease. So once again, the amount of air that is inspired will also decrease. I'm just showing this less than the restrictive one, than the obstructive one, but it may not be so. It may not be the case in everything. It's just so that I can represent everything differently. Okay. So again, the restrictive, the expansion is restricted. So there is no. So the maximum amount of air that is inspired has decreased. Now, as you noticed, I said the expansion is restricted, not the deflation of lungs. Since the deflation of lungs is not decreased, so the volume of FeV1 almost remains the same. Once again, in restrictive, the volume, that the FeV1 almost remains the same as that of normal, but the amount of time taken is more than the normal. So that is how you can distinguish between the obstructive and a restrictive lung disease using a timed vital capacity graph, or you can say it is forced expiratory volume curve. This is something that you will have in your Viva. This is a chart that is present in every Viva, so make sure you understand this. And this is all about the lung volumes and capacities. So moving on to the next part of our discussion, that is lung compliance. What does compliance mean? Compliance means the distensibility of the lungs. The distensibility means how easily it can expand and recoil. Okay. So what is the technical definition for lung compliance? Lung compliance is defined as the change in volume per unit change in the transpulmonary pressure. What does that mean? Let's break that down. Change in transpulmonary pressure. Change in transpulmonary pressure means how much during inspiration the transpulmonary pressure decreases. Okay. So transpulmonary pressure increases. So the increase in the transpulmonary pressure is the change. So this change causes an increase in volume of the lungs. This increase in volume of the lungs for a normal healthy individual is 200 ml. So that means the compliance of a healthy individual is 200 ml per centimeter H2O of water, H2O. Okay, so that is lung compliance for a healthy individual. Now looking at the graph of the lung compliance, this graph is known as hysteresis loop. Okay. So over here I have mentioned pleural pressure, but in definition I said transpulmonary pressure. How is that related? So I'll just tell you what is transpulmonary pressure, pleural pressure and alveolar pressure. Okay, so transpulmonary pressure mathematically is equal to alveolar pressure minus pleural pressure. Okay, transpulmonary pressure is the pressure across the lungs, pleural pressure is the pressure across the pleura, alveolar pressure is the pressure across the alveoli. Okay, we'll discuss about them in detail in the further part. Just remember for right now that this is the formula. Okay, so while measuring this lung compliance, we ask the person to breathe in, pause, let the pressure across the alveoli be equal to the pressure to the atmospheric pressure. So what does that mean? That means the alveolar pressure difference becomes zero. We let that happen during the measurement of the lung compliance. Such a measurement of lung compliance is known as static lung compliance. Okay, so in this method we allow the alveolar pressure to become zero. Okay, and the pleural pressure is always a negative pressure. Okay, and the value for a pleural pressure can be, for example, let's just say it's -4. Why is it negative and why, and that all will be covered in the later part. For now, just remember this. So as you can clearly see that the transpulmonary pressure becomes 4. So that is how transpulmonary pressure and pleural pressure are the same. There's just a difference of a sign. Okay, so representing pleural pressure over here is also correct. And why we use pleural pressure? Because what we measure is actually the pleural pressure. Okay, this can be measured by using a balloon that is inserted into the esophagus, and transesophageal pressure is calculated. Transesophageal pressure and pleural pressure are the same. So that is how we measure or calculate pleural pressure. Okay, now moving on to the graph. As I said, since there is a decrease in the pleural pressure, there is an increase in the lung volume. And what was that for the normal healthy individual? 200 ml for each centimeter of H2O. Okay, so change in 1 centimeter of H2O would reflect to a change in approximately 200 ml or 0.2 liters. Okay, so this is what this diagram means. This is the inspiratory curve. Okay, so during inspiration the pleural pressure keeps on decreasing and the lung volume keeps on increasing. This is the graph that you obtain. While expiration, the pleural pressure keeps on moving towards the positive side. That means it becomes less negative or more positive. So the graph moves from here to here. Okay, so you'll ask again, then why is the curve not same? Why are the inspiratory and expiratory curves not overlapping? Why is the pressure difference required to change the same amount of volume different? I'll explain it to you using an example. Imagine there's a closed door. and you want to open that door, the force required to open that door is much greater than if the door was already opened and you were trying to open it even further. Correct? So in the same way, during inspiration, the most of the airways are collapsed. They are not completely collapsed, they are partially collapsed. So when you try to open them, you require more force, thus more difference in the pressure. That is why the curve that you obtain during inspiration follows this path, and during expiration it follows this path. During expiration, what happens is that the lung is already open, and what you have to do, and the work that you have to do is just to keep those airways open, and the amount of work required to do that is less. Thus the pressure difference required is also less. Due to these reasons, we get different inspiratory and expiratory curves. The difference between this inspiratory and expiratory curves is known as hysteresis. That is why this diagram is also known as hysteresis loop. Okay, now moving on to the different types. As I mentioned already, this graph that we obtained was for static lung compliance, because during the recording of this graph, we asked the person to stop at regular intervals to make the alveolar pressure equal to atmospheric pressure so that it is zero. But so this is one way of measuring. The other way of measuring is dynamic lung compliance. What is dynamic lung compliance? Dynamic, as the word suggests, it's in continuous state. That means you do not ask the person to stop during the recording of this, and you measure the complete inspiratory and expiratory pressures in one go. Okay, so what is the significance of dynamic lung compliance? Dynamic lung compliance is more in athletes. Okay, if the dynamic lung compliance is more in athletes, it's more favorable to them because they require greater capacity to hold the air, and they do not need to breathe continuously, right? So athletes, it's more favorable to have a higher dynamic lung compliance. Moving to the last part, that is specific lung compliance. This is very important. Specific lung compliance is very important. Why? So as I said, lung compliance depends upon the work required to change the volume. For example, there's a child. The child has a smaller size of lung as compared to the adults. So the force required and the pressure differences required would be different, obviously, and it would be lesser than those in the adults. So the lung compliance diagram the compliance that you obtain from the diagram for a child would be less than the adults. So that means that the compliance is below normal. So that is not proper, right? So it would create a discrepancy and a difficulty in understanding, and you'll have to remember much more values, much more different ranges for each and every age group. That is not recommended, and it's more tedious for us. So what we do is we calculate specific lung compliance, and specific lung compliance is calculated by a formula where the lung compliance that is calculated is divided by FRC. FRC, as we saw in the earlier video of lung volumes and capacities, is the functional residual capacity, and the functional residual capacity also depends upon the lung volume and and also the lung size. So if there's a change in lung compliance, there's a change in FRC also. Okay, so just to give you an example, to calculate what is the normal value of specific lung compliance, as I earlier said, the normal value of lung compliance for a healthy adult in both the lungs are 0.2 liters per centimeter H2O, and FRC for an adult is approximately 2 liters. Okay, that gives us a value of 0.1. Okay, that gives us a value of 0.1. That means the normal specific lung compliance is 0.1, and this 0.1 is universal. That can be applied even to a child, even to someone who has underwent a surgery and has one of his lungs removed. If one of his lungs is removed, that means the lung compliance would get halved. That means the lung compliance would become 0.1. But at the same time, the FRC would also become half. Okay, so the FRC would also become 1 liter. That would give us a 0.1 liter. This means that the other lung is healthy. Okay, so this helps us. Specific lung compliance actually helps us to calculate the functioning of lungs and the nature of the tissue parenchyma also. Okay. Now moving on to the applied part, the lung compliance changes in various disorders. Okay, so the lung compliance increases. So what do you mean by when lung compliance increases? What would happen? What do you expect? The lung compliance is increase in distensibility. If the lung compliance has increased, that means it's easy to inflate the lungs, but at the same time it's difficult to deflate the lungs because it has lost its elastic recoil. This occurs in conditions known as COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disorders, such as emphysema and bronchial asthma. Okay, and in which conditions does lung compliance decrease? What do you mean by decrease in lung compliance? It means the lung is not as distensible as it used to be. It's difficult to inflate the lungs. Okay, so in these conditions, the conditions in which this occurs are disorders such as consolidation of lungs, pulmonary edema, lung fibrosis. Okay, in these disorders, the lung compliance decreases, so it's very difficult to inflate the lungs. Okay, and such disorders are known as restrictive lung disorders. Okay, such disorders are restrictive lung disorders. So this completes the lung compliance part, the applied part. If a question is asked about lung compliance or describe lung compliance, you also have to just mention all these parts. And one more part that you have to mention over here is about surface tension, that I forgot to mention over here. The lung compliance is due to two things. If you were to say, it's due to two things. 1/3 of the lung compliance is due to the elastic forces and the various physical forces that oppose the expansion of lungs. The second, or the major part that causes 2/3 of this lung compliance, is due to surface tension. As we saw earlier, surface tension tends to reduce the lung volume, and lung compliance means the distensibility or ability to expand and recoil. So the surface tension contributes to 2/3 of the lung compliance and decreases the lung compliance if there is increase in the surface tension above normal. Okay, so how do we know that surface tension affects it? I'll just explain it to you in very briefly. I'll explain very briefly over here. If there's a lung that is kept inside a saline solution, the air-water interface is lost because there is saline present inside. Since there is no air-water interface, there is no surface tension. Okay, there is no surface tension, and we have eliminated surface tension from this equation. Now we measure the lung compliance. So when we draw a plot, or when we plot a hysteresis loop, we find that the hysteresis loop has 1/3 the area of normal lung compliance. This means the lung compliance that is due to the surface tension is 2/3. That is, it contributes 2/3 to the total lung compliance. Okay, so that is how surface tension affects lung compliance. And so that was all for lung compliance, and I'll see you in the next part. I hope this made sense. Now you can go back and refer to your books. I'm sure you'll understand this much more better, and I'll see you in the next one.